Hi there, everybody. It's Queso. You didn't know. I'm Queso, and this is.
Tolberto Simpson, folks.
There we go. Now you got names. Now you got names. I don't know if we said our names ever this entire time. People are sitting here
Mhm.
like, Queso, you didn't know. What's this? Like, why is it named after cheese?
Right, right. I'm
Uh,
definitely in the house.
Alrighty. Well, today we're diving deep into one of history's most compelling rivalries and the second half of Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general who brought Rome to its knees, and the indomitable Roman Republic that ultimately prevailed. We'll explore not just the battles, but the brilliant minds, the strategic shifts, and the enduring questions of how history remembers its heroes and villains.
Definitely, definitely. And I'm not gonna fib. During the break between the first and second part of this story, myself, I kind of went back and studied the Punic Wars. And what I got out of it is just the similarities between not just today's history and things like that on a military level, but just on a human intellect level. The aspects of where this battle started was started over things that have a lot to do with pride and things like that. So yeah, a hot story.
You want to dive in a little bit more on that, and those comparisons? Because I'll tell you, I didn't do any extra real research on the Punic Wars themselves, actually.
Okay. So, well, first of all, from my research, I don't know if it was something that you brought up, but it was interesting to know that at the time, at the beginning of the Punic War, Carthage was actually the big dog, so to speak. You know, it was rich in more ways than Rome was rich, so to speak, on a military level, economic level, all those good things. But yeah, it was basically the big dog, so to speak. And it started because the way Rome saw it, Carthage was cutting a little close into its territory. They were explorers, of course, of the land and sea. And basically, Rome didn't like the fact that Carthage was basically like exploring and invading their space as they saw it, invading their territory. And that's something that has a lot to do with, like I said, human emotion, human intellect, and on the most simple conflicts, from a guy on a train or at, at the store who's, getting a little close to your personal space, to hell, gang rivalries and shit like that.
Germany and Poland.
You know what I mean? It's the same shit like, hey, motherfucker, you a little too close to home. What you doing on my turf? That type of thing. So I like that aspect of it. How it'd be interesting to see ancient humans it, display the same emotions and basically saying so many words like, "You need to get out of my space." I think that'd have been interesting, and how the Second Punic Wars started because Carthage reneged on their promise not to cut too close to home. And not only that, they got Roman allies with them. So they basically took people who Rome was associated with and had them in their back pocket. And they looked at that as extra disrespect, which sparked the Second Punic War.
And that makes a lot of sense because when the Second Punic War kind of led, or at least at the end of it, it involved Hamilcar, our boy Hannibal's dad, in that war. And it's interesting you mentioned that having the Roman allies in their back pocket as well, because that was another tactic that more or less Hannibal was using. So it's kind of interesting he's a product of his time.
Yes, yes, yes. It's lovely seeing how history links together.
And the way you mentioned the human aspect of it, I mean, that's a big thing that I don't think people think about when it comes to history a lot, that it's something that isn't just words in a textbook. These were people just like us. They weren't any less intelligent. They weren't any less evolved in most aspects. I mean, their technology and the knowledge they had available to them wasn't on the limit that ours almost is, but they were just as intelligent as we are and just as full of emotion.
Hmm. Hmm. Definitely. It's like what the guy who wrote the 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene. I remember him talking about how when he sees certain people, it reminds him of figures in history and what he tried to get out of writing the 48 Laws of Power the way he did. It was to try to, like we said, get people to see the human aspect of historical figures.
Uh, Writing that he did in that, it really is like uh, shallow and against human nature, the things he's describing. It's not something where you're building each other up, it's more tearing people down.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's different aspects of it, and then I remember him defending himself and saying basically what he wanted to get out of writing is I think he basically what he's trying to say is that everybody has evil tendencies and stuff like that. I think that's what he was kind of trying to get out of it. I think that can be argued to a certain extent, but like I get what you mean. It kind of seems a little much.
I like your points that you make on the 48 Laws of Power. I didn't really think of it from that aspect, that it's more tongue in cheek, not meant to be followed as a diatribe, but more like everybody has this within them. Sort of like the Philadelphia experiment, whenever they did the fake prison and the kids like were supposed to be prison guards and the other kids were prisoners, and it kind of showed you like, oh, within days you can become a bastard. Or like there's a famous book that was written about, there was this volunteer police unit in Nazi Germany while all the Nazis were out fighting. They took this reserve of just like regular middle-aged guys that were like run of the mill, average, just, yeah, man, I like to barbecue, I like to grill, I like to cut my lawn type guys. And that within a month span, like they became monsters. They became the type of people that could work at a death camp. They became the type of people that could beat your head in with a club. And they were normal, just guys like us. So
Mhm.
I do like that aspect, that thought of being able to put it into words in a book like, hey, everybody's capable of it.
And
And that was a really good way to put it, and a really, another way I'm thinking you can kind of tie it in with the stuff we're talking about too, that is no different than Hamilcar saying, "Hey, fuck you, Rome." Rome saying, "Fuck you, Hamilcar," and Hannibal stepping up like, "Hey, I'm taking the block back."
definitely, man, definitely, definitely the unyielding foe.
Speaking of the unyielding foe, I think if you remember as we left last week, it ended on Hannibal having completed a series of battles that were catastrophic defeats for Rome. I mean, the scene where the Republic, reeling from losses at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and most famously Cannae, they were on the brink of collapse, but they refused to surrender because all Italians are hard-headed. This defiance wasn't just bravado, it was a testament to the remarkable institutional resilience and a capacity to learn from devastating failure.
Well, I think I'll just say if we were ever hoping to get some sponsors from Italian companies whenever, if and when we reach that level, if we were hoping to do that, that's never going to happen.
Damn, and I do like a good ragu.
Just in case y'all are out there, I've always had Italian friends growing up. Robert Romano and Chris Princivelli will contest to this. I guarantee it. But in other news, yeah, it was definitely a scary sight, as some of my Chicago friends might say, for the Roman soldiers. Imagining this scene is kind of a desperate thing to do. 50 to 70,000 Roman soldiers. That's, like I said last week, that's catastrophic. That's a catastrophic defeat in war in any time setting, like today or 50,000 years ago. That's hell. That's a pretty decent chunk of people going refusing to surrender after something like that. I will say this about Rome, that I'm sure it built a lot of character in them, if anything.
Now, would you say that it's bravery, or would you say that it's like foolish pride to not give up at this point? It makes you think, doesn't it?
One could argue that maybe it's a little bit of both, but I guess I'll say you never give up. You know what I mean?
Fair
But
enough. Well, that's where we enter Quintus Fabius Maximus Vercosus, a man whose cautious approach earned him the nickname the Delayer. And I don't think it was meant to be nice, but Fabius understood, and I think you raised this point last week, that facing Hannibal in a pitched battle was going to be a losing proposition any way you look at it. Hannibal's tactical genius had already shown in open confrontation, and so Fabius proposed something radical for the Romans, something that only he apparently at the time could see: avoid battling Hannibal directly.
this is where it gets sticky. And I'll say one thing. This guy, his name definitely his name definitely does him justice. You know what I mean? Like when you have those guys who are going to make an important shift during history, it's important they have a name that's really exemplary. Just Fabius Maximus Percosus, just all over the place.
The Delayer was so good of a nickname for somebody. I don't know. I like that. Like, hey, it's the Delayer. Hey, Delayer, you gonna win for Rome, Delayer?
Hell yeah, hell yeah.
What you want to hear in the bedroom?
Oh no, but this just shows you have to know what your strengths and weaknesses are in battle and act accordingly in every aspect of life. You know what I mean? I just love when you say that he just knew he wasn't gonna win facing him directly, so it just made sense to do otherwise.
And the fact that he's the only one to see this, because when it comes down to it, what we're about to see is like a really interesting part of history and one that they don't, like I said, teach in school enough. I was taught in high school history, and the one community college history class I took that Hannibal was the guy with the elephants. It was more or less that's all we really covered. But it's more to it than that because Fabian really was Hannibal's equal. So Roman forces would harass Hannibal's vulnerable supply lines and attack isolated outposts on top of ambushing foraging parties. They would engage in skirmishes, but they would also refuse to be drawn into the decisive open confrontations that Hannibal craved. He tried to goad them into it, and they just wouldn't be a part of it. See, initially, this plan was deeply unpopular. The Roman populace, accustomed to being aggressive in warfare and eager for revenge, mocked Fabius, thus the nickname. His cautious approach proved highly effective, though. It gradually weakened Hannibal's forces and forced him into a prolonged stalemate. Hannibal had limited manpower and difficulty receiving reinforcements from Carthage, so he was ill equipped for this kind of grinding conflict. The Fabian strategy fundamentally altered the war's dynamic, effectively neutralizing Hannibal's tactical brilliance by denying him the very engagements that were the things he excelled at. It bought Rome time, really, is what it did, allowing them to rebuild their forces and regain confidence, turning it into a test not of brutal power, but of endurance and logistical capacity. Areas where Rome, with the vast citizen reserves it had and controls of the sea, had a marked, decisive advantage.
Like I said, it's just showing it played out how you can't even do what you excel at. So the point of the point of having it sort of becomes useless, you know? I mean, you would think that somebody like Hannibal would find some way somehow to, alley-oop that to get around that, but evidently that wasn't too much of the case from what we know about the turnout of the wars, you know?
Well, see, and he had reason for that. He might have been able to do what he needed to do and get past if it was just Vercosus. But while Fabius was containing Hannibal in Italy, there was another Roman general that was rising up extremely fast. He would ultimately prove to be the one that was Hannibal's true strategic equal, even more so than Fabius. Because Fabius just had him locked in a stalemate, really. I guess you could say Publius Cornelius Scipio really was the guy that equaled him on the battlefield as far as setting pieces go, was really much more his equal that way. See, he was later known as Scipio Africanus. Scipio had personal experience of Hannibal's early victories, having fought under his father at the Battle of Tunicus, a brutal Roman defeat.
Yeah, man. And just to kind of backtrack to what I was talking about as far as my research between part one and part two. This is where it got ugly for him. Scipio Africanus, the guy who Africa was eventually named after, because the tradition back then was you name whatever area you conquer in battle. And that was just the case at a point in time for North Africa, but eventually the entire continent just became Africa.
So that doesn't bode well for our characters here, does it?
Nah, not at all. I guess that's an ultimate sting, you know? But I didn't recall that he had battled his father, though. Interesting.
Isn't it? Isn't it? Oh no, he fought under his own father, Scipio did, I believe. So Scipio's rise was marked by innovative strategic thinking and tactical brilliance. He took command in Spain, which was like a super crucial Carthaginian stronghold and a source of a lot of their resources. This is really what hurt him, because like I said, Hannibal, he might have been able to find a way to make it work if he was just getting frozen out from the battlefield. But this guy right here, Scipio, really nailed the nail into the coffin that was meant for Hannibal. Because once he took this stronghold and that source of resources, he launched an unexpected offensive, capturing New Carthage in 209 BCE, Carthage's most important port in the region. He then decisively defeated Carthaginian forces under Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal Barca at Baecula in 208 BCE. Later, the combined armies of Hasdrubal, Gisco, and Mago were all defeated at Lipia in 206 BCE by Scipio. At Lipia, Scipio employed a double envelopment maneuver. And why does that sound familiar? Because it was strikingly similar to Hannibal's own masterpiece at Cannae, but with his own innovative use of cavalry on top of mobile infantry. He had learned Hannibal's lessons, and he had completely adapted them to his own fighting style.
Genius, definitely. I guess this really answers what I said earlier about the whole why didn't cause so I thought to myself, like, at the end of the day, Hannibal could have probably, managed to basically catch him somewhere. I'm sure he could have been aware of his circumstances or his environment somehow, but Scipio just, I guess he just really thought around him. It's just a testament, I think, to evolution, not just in a biological sense, but in the natural sense, how every empire is going to learn from the other and sort of evolve and outmaster the previous one.
That's what makes human beings so amazing too.
Yeah, definitely. I think Rome had learned not just a lot from Carthage, but a lot from African empires of the time, Egypt being another, and they had sort of like adapted and made new things. Just shows adaptation, the natural adaptation we all follow.
And like we're very good as humans at learning. I think we're probably the only animal really that can do it on the way we do it, that level of being able to learn from something and make it better. Because despite initial opposition from the Roman Senate, Scipio, leveraging popular support, made an audacious strategic decision to take the war directly to Carthage in North Africa. He meticulously trained a corps of volunteers for his army in Sicily, notably emphasizing the formation of strong cavalry, a departure from traditional Roman thought, but a clear lesson learned from Hannibal's successes. His invasion of North Africa proved to be a strategic masterstroke. I mean, nobody saw it coming. He defeated Carthaginian relief forces at the Great Plains and engineered the fall of Tunis. This direct threat to Carthage's homeland forced the Carthaginian Senate to recall Hannibal from Italy, finally drawing him away from the Italian peninsula after 15 years. So Scipio's emergence marked a critical turning point. Rome had finally found a commander who could not just match Hannibal's strategic tactical brilliance, not just with brute force, but in an intelligent and adaptive way, his attacks and stances even greater. A big, bold counteroffense that was done with pure intelligence and adaptation.
Between me and you, have you ever heard of the writing Scipio's Palace?
I have not. Do go on.
Okay, so basically it's about being grateful for little things and just seeing through the mirage of what may appear as luxury. It talks about how Scipio's Palace, when you go back to it, it's just a bunch of stone and shit like that, and how this was the dwelling of a supposed king, and how we should be grateful for small things because it's like our living circumstances are much greater than that. But I just thought it was interesting, and because I know that you've delved into some really great writers, you know what I mean, like Nietzsche. I'm sure you've read some Immanuel Kant type of things.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sure you're familiar with those type of writers and works, but that was a hell of an invasion, to say the very least.
And so the stage was set for this ultimate showdown, right? Because you're right. I mean, this is going to be an insane part of history now. We're getting to the action scenes, man. After 15 years of fighting on Roman soil, Hannibal was finally recalled to defend the homeland. So Scipio Africanus' successful invasion of North Africa in 204 BCE created an untenable situation for Carthage. Hannibal, despite his unparalleled success in Italy, had been unable to win a decisive victory that would compel Rome to surrender. Nor had he received sufficient reinforcements due to Roman naval superiority and internal political struggles. So, what he had to do at that point was return to his homeland in 203 BCE, assembling an army of his remaining veterans and newly recruited forces, preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Scipio.
Hmm. And between me and you, this is the part where I left off at when I was doing my research. He eventually managed to, like we say, come face to face with Scipio in a confrontation, so to speak. So this is really close to home, and like you said, it's the action scene, so to speak. It's where I'll say, kind of in a movie, it's where you know what you want to happen isn't going to happen, but you still watch anyway. I'll put it like that.
Like when Batman gets his back broken in Batman, or no, that's not a great example, but I get what you mean, where you're like, oh no, he's gonna die. I didn't want him to die, but now I gotta watch him die.
Yeah, but truthfully, that's what makes the movie good. You know what I mean? Like, I think to myself in certain movies where everybody or a lot of people dies, I think, like, if everybody made it out alive, would it be such a great movie to me? Nah.
Right. Depending on the movie, what are the stakes then? I get what you mean.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Speaking of the showdown, let us not get carried away because that is very much in order. A tactical showdown, to be exact.
Yeah, the climactic Battle of Zama, which took place on October 19th, 202 BCE, near Zama, approximately 60 miles southwest of Carthage, in what is now modern Tunisia. The two greatest generals of their age would finally meet in this location, with armies roughly equal in size, Carthage fielding around 40,000 troops and Rome fielding around 35,000. Hannibal's battle plan relied, as it often did, heavily on his war elephants, placing 80 of them in front of three lines of infantry, hoping they would disrupt Roman formations. See, though, Scipio had really done his research on Hannibal's tactics. He anticipated and knew that there was going to be an elephant charge because there always was. So what he did was counter it by arranging his legions in columns that left gaps between them. This allowed the elephants to pass through harmlessly, not touching anyone like just running through a field of corn, rows
Mhm.
after rows. So Roman trumpets were blown to scare and confuse the animals, causing many to turn back and even start stampeding on Hannibal's own line, causing disarray.
I'm not gonna lie. This had to be one of those funny, embarrassing moments in history. Speaking of realizing how people in history were human like us, I'm sure the Roman soldiers were definitely getting their laughs in. I'm sure at that time when the elephants were, kind of flipping their shit and falling over. And if the Carthaginian soldiers were real enough, they were probably getting some laughs in at themselves. But definitely a brilliant strategy. I'm sure Hannibal had to tip his hat to.
And it's funny you say that. I'm just thinking like a Boondocks, like you just got elephant stomped in your chest.
Definitely, man. Definitely. Like, you eat a dick, nigga. You eat a dick. Seriously. It just goes to show how there was another quote unquote, well, not quote unquote, there was an advantage with him having roughly 5,000 more troops than.
But the Romans still, I don't know if it would have made a big enough difference, but I mean, they're even enough. It's the elephants that I think really, really hit them.
This took place in October.
The end of
Well,
October.
this makes me think even more because, as I was saying, I'm sure you know the origin of Friday the 13th theme, right? Like the Inquisition.
Let's pretend I don't for our listeners out there.
So basically, the Inquisition, lots of people were being brutalized in Europe, religious reasons, things like that. And it took place, I believe, in October on Friday the 13th. And so, what I was saying earlier, because it's just interesting the things that happen in October historically, at least.
And I kind of had a similar thought that I realized since it's the 19th, I'm like, oh, that's 4 days before my birthday. When you read about like historical things and it's like really close to your birthday, and you're like, oh, so if I was alive in World War II and I was in this war, like, or if I was in this battle, or, if I was here on this plane at this time that was a catastrophic disaster, I'd be, like dead, or I'd be in this battle and it'd be right before my birthday. Wonder if I'd live to see it.
Yeah, I love that I was born, you know what I mean, during at least the same month that St. Patrick's Day is celebrated. I always thought he was an interesting figure throughout history. How he was just a regular guy and people just made all these myths about him that have all these different shit like leprechauns and shit surrounded by it, to show how, like I said, like we're saying, humans can get carried away with things like folklore.
Very true. And we can get carried away with things like fighting in battle, like what's going on here with Scipio and these boys. See, the decisive moment came with the cavalry. The cavalry is really what made the difference for the Roman army. The cavalry here in this instance was led by Gaius Laelus and Numidian allies under Massinissa, swiftly routing out Hannibal's cavalry on the wing. Crucially, instead of pursuing the fleeing Carthaginians' horsemen, the Roman and Numidian cavalry instead returned to the battlefield and attacked Hannibal's infantry from the rear. This completed a devastating double envelopment, which is really, really ironic when you consider it was a tactic that Hannibal himself had perfected. Trapped between Scipio's advancing infantry and the returning cavalry, Hannibal's forces were crushed. You had 20,000 men killed and a large number injured, compared only to about 1,500 Roman losses. Hannibal himself managed to evade capture. Zama was the ultimate test of Hannibal's tactical genius against Scipio's adaptive brilliance, and Scipio triumphed. And that triumph stemmed from his ability to learn from Hannibal's successes in the past and innovate his own counterattacks, effectively turning Hannibal's own strengths against him. and it marked the definitive end of the war. Hannibal, he was a very good general at figuring out strengths and weaknesses in the moment, not so much, I guess, adapting strengths and weaknesses in the future.
And I guess this is the part in the movie where the sad but somewhat triumphant victory for a certain side music comes up, you know?
Yes
It's
and no. See, you think it's a victory, but it's just a prolonged fight still.
and that was something in itself too. 20,000 killed in that one battle.
So the defeat at Zama exhausted Carthage, leaving it with no option but to surrender. The peace terms imposed by Rome were exceptionally harsh, designed to permanently cripple any military and economic power Carthage might possess and ensure Roman hegemony in the Western Mediterranean. Carthage was stripped of all possessions outside of Africa, and it was faced with a heavy war indemnity. It pretty much guaranteed their autonomy to Massinissa' kingdom, which was a Roman ally on its borders. The loss of territories like Spain, with its valuable silver mines, cut off Carthage's primary source of wealth and manpower for its mercenary armies. The heavy war indemnity would strain its economy for decades, and the presence of a hostile Numidian kingdom prevented any expansion. The outcome solidified Roman dominance and set the stage for expansion on Roman imperialism. Zama, in its peace terms, marked the definitive end of Carthage as a major power, ultimately leading to the city's destruction decades later in the Third Punic War.
Well, to a certain extent, the anti-hero.
So Caesar's rise to absolute power culminated in his appointment as dictator for life. This fundamentally challenged the traditional power structures of the Roman Republic, and it angered many of the city's elites. His assassination on the Ides of March in 44 BCE, intended by senators to save the Republic, was paradoxically what accelerated its demise. With that, there was left a power vacuum and renewed civil conflict that followed. It ultimately led to the rise of his heir, Octavian, or Augustus, who established the Roman Empire. Caesar's actions, despite their controversial nature, directly led to the establishment of one of the most influential empires in history, making him a foundational figure of all Western civilization. His fame is thus a product of both his substantive achievements and masterful promotion, on top of profound historical impact that was left by this empire being formed. He was not only made history, but wrote his history, ensuring the narrative would be preserved and revered. Hannibal is a victim, really, of the fact that history lionizes victors and those who establish lasting empires. Hannibal, despite that brilliance he had, ultimately lost the war and his civilization was destroyed. Whilst Caesar, conversely, despite his controversial methods, directly led to the establishment of the Roman Empire, a foundational institution of Western civilization, which was so, prominent, people don't really realize the Byzantine Empire was just the continuation of the Roman Empire. The Byzantines didn't call themselves Byzantines, they called themselves Romans. That's how completely transformative he was in history and the creation of this empire. So, that being said, a lot of historical education, particularly in the West, naturally places figures like Caesar at its core narrative because he's an architect of enduring states. Western historical education also traditionally emphasizes the empire as a foundational pillar for law, governance, language, and culture. Hannibal, as Rome's great adversary, is often presented primarily in relation to Rome's triumph over him, rather than as a central figure in his own right from a Carthaginian perspective. That disparity in historical recognition is not a reflection of Hannibal's military prowess, which is widely acknowledged even by his enemies, but a consequence of the power dynamics inherent in historical record keeping. The ultimate outcome of the conflict and the cultural lens that it's traditionally taught is what serves the narrative, and his story serves as a powerful example of how historical memory is constructed in that sense and selectively preserved.
Like I said, at the end of the day, these guys, they knew there's no ignoring what a guy like Hannibal is capable of and bred for and what he reflects. So they they had to they had to take it in even if they didn't like it. You know what I mean? As you said.
Let's talk about Hannibal's campaign in Italy then, since we're going to set facts straight. He was ultimately unsuccessful, yes, but it was an extraordinary feat of military leadership given the overwhelming strategic disadvantages he was going up against. He had limitations. He had naval inferiority. Because after the First Punic War, Carthage had lost dominance in the Mediterranean. Rome, by contrast, controlled the sea, effectively preventing any significant supplies or reinforcements from reaching Hannibal by sea. Hannibal's small fleet of 52 ships was no match for Rome's 220. He was facing a risky and costly overland march across the Alps. That was the only option he had because this naval blockade created a fundamental logistical way to keep him isolated.
Yeah. And I'll just say one thing, not to pat ourselves on the back, but at the same time to pat ourselves on the back. Give grace and give a lot of praise and thanks to guys like us, because just thinking to myself now, it's like, who knows? If it wasn't for two guys who just wanted to get roasted and do a podcast about historical stuff that lots of people wouldn't know, who knows? There's some people out there who now they don't have a skewed version of history thanks to us. You know what I mean? Yeah, it just shows that sometimes pearls of wisdom aren't going to come from some $500,000 suit wearing college professor. It's going to come from two reefer smoking motherfuckers who want to get roasted and do a podcast about random history. But yeah,
Well, it's really important to understand Hannibal's story in particular, especially when you think about it in contrast to someone like Caesar and the relation they have together and what formed the narrative we know today to truly understand the past. Because it's imperative to move beyond monolithic truths and critically re examine conventional narratives. Hannibal's story serves as a powerful reminder that the most fascinating and instructive lessons like this podcast versus school, often lie hidden in the shadows of history. Using continued curiosity and critical engagement with the past is what you really need to have to recognize the achievements of those often relegated to footnotes, especially those who challenge dominant powers from a disadvantaged position. It enriches our collective memory and provides a more complete, nuanced understanding of that intricate tapestry we call the human experience.